Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Boss Rush Spotlight Podcast, the developer and creator interview series by Boss Rush. I'm your host, Stephanie Klimov, and today I have sole indie developer of Farewell North, Kyle Banks. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm great, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I'm great.
No worries. That's the one downside of, recording from, distance and stuff like that. I used to record with some colleagues in person, and it's just different, so we get used to it.
Yeah, we'll find our cadence.
Exactly. So why don't you give me just a quick introduction of yourself and what you do, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, sounds good. So my name's Kyle Banks. I am a game developer, as you said. I created and recently released a game called Farewell North. I'm based here in Scotland, in Edinburgh, but obviously you can tell I'm not from here originally. I'm originally from Canada. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Nice. Now, how's the weather up there?
It's getting a little chilly. It's not too bad, though. We're still, in Celsius anyways, we're still above zero, so that's good.
Yeah, but we're getting there, though, right?
We're getting there, yeah.
All right. So what I usually like to do to kind of break the ice, I kind of thought of this idea from, inspiration from other podcasts. And also, I'm an introvert myself, so I find it kind of ironic that our boss man, Corey, put me kind of in charge of doing these spotlight interviews. So just a couple for fun, get to know you. First, as a game developer, there's a lot of time and effort that's put into it. It's not as easy as maybe young kids seem to think it is. So you got to stay awake, got to stay caffeinated. What's your ideal form of caffeination?
I'm not too fussy. I'll drink about anything. I love coffee. I love tea. And my guilty pleasure is an energy drink. So I do enjoy like a Monster or like an Iron Brew Energy. It's kind of like my guilty pleasure. But I love coffee, tea, anything caffeinated.
Nice. I'm the same way too. I did have to cut down my energy drinks because I relied on them too much at one point in my
Me
life,
too.
and kind of hurt my stomach. Wasn't happy about it. My quick origin
Yeah.
story with coffee was that in high school, I think my senior year, I was studying for a major like AP exam. So I was begging my parents, "Let me have coffee. Let me try your coffee. This magical thing known as coffee." My parents made me a cup of coffee, and I drank it, and then I fell asleep on top of my textbook. So guess it didn't work out that time.
Yeah, it didn't quite work. Yeah, my origin with coffee was interesting too. I couldn't stand it. Like the smell of it like made me sick. Like I really, really disliked coffee. And it wasn't until I was in like my 20s. We flew overseas from Canada to Germany. I was so tired, and I was like, you know what, I need something. And the first thing we saw was coffee, so I was like, I'm gonna try it. And it just like overnight, like immediately, I was like hooked. And I don't think I've gone a day since without coffee.
There you go. All right. So when are you most productive? Are you a morning bird, a night owl? Where do you kind of fit in a lot of your work time?
Definitely a morning person. Actually, very early morning person. My wife is a baker, so she's up at 4 a.m. every day, and just to make things easy, I get up with her. So I get up at 4 a.m. every day, and I love it. Like by the time everyone else is waking up and like getting started around like 9, I'm already kind of like through the majority of my day. I feel like super productive, and I can kind of like check out around lunchtime and just kind of have the whole afternoon, which is really nice. So yeah, I'm big time morning person.
Right there with you. Now, you just like my ears perked up at Baker, so it must be kind of really great having easy access to a lot of wonderful baked goods. Do you have like a favorite thing that she makes?
Ooh.
Or top
So
three?
I can give you a top 3. I can give you a top 20, but I'll give you a top 3. The cinnamon buns, amazing. Like I can never have enough cinnamon buns. Scones, like a jalapeno and cheddar scone, is just like perfect to me. And then one that she recently developed a recipe. It's a Turkish recipe, and it is called. I can't even remember what they're called. I think they have 2 names. So one's like achima, and there's another name for them. I can't remember. But they're amazing. They're kind of like they're almost like a bagel, but they're like lighter and fluffier, and they're just incredible. She does one that has like feta and chili flakes, and it's like just the best thing. It's so good.
Does she do international shipping?
Unfortunately not. It's a very small little bakery here in Edinburgh, but if you're ever out, definitely check it out.
It's on my list. I'm trying to hit up all the places that I have like origins from. I'm not a lot Scottish. I'm only about an eighth, but still enough. So I want to check out Edinburgh and all those wonderful places.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely should.
All right. Well, moving on to more game-related questions. What's your favorite gaming genre for you to play?
Good question. Anything narrative driven, really. Like that
Mm,
really is what draws me in. But it doesn't matter if it's like a walking simulator, a shooter, a survival horror. As long as it's got like a good, compelling narrative, I'm kind of
yep.
like hooked, and I'm
Hmm.
in for the ride. I don't really play like a lot of like when I was younger. I played a lot of like RPGs. Not so much anymore. Now I kind of prefer games that are like 5 to 10 hours tops, just so I can kind of like get the story, get in, get out, and yeah, get on with all the other stuff in life. But yeah, anything narrative driven.
Yeah, I feel very similar to you. When I was younger and had more time, I felt like it's okay to
Yeah,
just kind of grind for hours. And now it's not that I don't like RPGs. I just know in my head I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can just like not throw away, but essentially throw away 50 hours. Like I just kind of want to have a
yeah,
nice, powerful story and then move on.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. I think that's like a common thing. But I picked up like Baldur's Gate just because hearing amazing
Yeah.
things, and it looked really good. And like just as it's kind of like starting to get going, I realized I was already like 10 hours in. Like, there's no way I'm ever gonna
Yeah.
finish this,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So yeah, if a game says it has like 100 hours, I'm kind of like, I don't think I'm ever gonna
Mhm.
be able to play that,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. There's one game this year. Now, I'm not a horror genre person, just in general, only because I'm a big weenie. My parents exposed me to movies like Chucky and Killer Clowns from Outer Space when I was too young for it. So now I'm just like,
Mhm.
I don't know. But I've been, once I got into Boss Rush, I started playing a couple of select horror games because of the powerful narratives or lore that they have. So, for example, Soma was my first one because I
Okay.
really love the concept behind that game. And the one that I played this year was Silent Hill 2 remake because I've never
Mhm.
played any of the Silent Hill games. I'm too scared for that. But I was like, the remake is a great opportunity. I did like the Medium, which was made by the Bloober team, and yeah, the psychological aspect of it and the story and the twist at the end, which I thankfully kind of kept myself spoiler free this whole time. I loved it. So
Man, I think we have a very similar. I'm a huge baby when it comes to horror. Like I cannot. I'm still traumatized from watching The Ring. Like when I was a kid, I had an N64,
mm,
and if you turned off the N64 before the TV, the TV would do like the static thing, and
yeah.
just the thought of myself forgetting and doing that was enough to scare me. I couldn't play my N64 for like years. Um, so yeah, I'm a huge baby with horror. But just after Feral North came out, I don't know why like I've always been like drawn to horror aesthetic. I really like the look of Resident Evil,
Hmm.
Silent Hill, and all that stuff, but I've never played any of those games. But just after Feral North came out, I was like, you know what? Like I'm sick of being scared of all this stuff. I'm 35. I'm not going to be scared of these games anymore. So I played a couple Resident Evils. I played 2 and 3, and I'm
Uh-huh.
dying to check out Silent Hill 2. But it's such a slog. Like I'm not good at it at all. Um,
Hmm.
but I just love the aesthetic of horror games, and they do have really interesting stories and environments and everything. So yeah, I'm trying to like expand and get into that.
Yeah.
And I've heard great things about Soma, so I might check that out.
Yeah, I feel like we are similar. Like I think it's just our taste and our age too. I'm like we fit in the similar demographic. So two things. So what I did, and I'm not afraid to admit it, I did use a guide through Silent Hill 2. Not that I needed a step by step of everything, but because I'm a weenie and I don't want to dwell in an area running around just trying to. Because if I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off, I'm not going to be able to think properly with those puzzles. So I'll use a guide just so
Yeah.
I can like make sure that I progress and not run around screaming. So um I hope you can get to it. I do think it deserves some sort of award for audio design because
Mm.
just hearing the atmosphere makes like 50% of the game already,
Oh,
just that
totally. Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
Also, if you if you have time, I really enjoyed the Resident Evil 4 remake because
Okay.
it's got a little bit more of an action along with the scary. But this kind of now this is going to be my last question for you. That since you mentioned the N64, I'm going to assume it may or may not have been your first console, but definitely childhood or youth, right?
For sure.
So
Yeah.
have you
Yeah.
heard that Analog is going to be launching their version of the N64?
No, I haven't. So
Okay, I'll send you a link.
yeah, please do. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so Analog is a company that makes hardware based off of older consoles. So it's almost like video game preservation, but with better or modernized technology. Like I have the Pocket Analog, so it looks like a Game Boy but with a much bigger screen,
Ah,
and it
cool.
has a backlight, and you it that one device alone can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. I think a couple other
Ooh.
things. So they are going to be releasing an N64 version. It's not emulation. You could just pop in your old cartridge. You could play it in 4K resolution. I don't know how those polygons will look in 4K,
Yeah, that's
but
gonna look chunky.
yeah. So,
That's
all
really
right.
cool.
Yeah. All right. You know what? How about this? We'll wrap it up with this one just because my son and I get into a big argument about it every once in a while. Who is the
Sure.
superior Mario brother, Mario or Luigi?
That's tough. I'm gonna have to go Luigi, just
Fair.
because Mario gets all the glory, but Luigi doesn't, and he still goes out there and he's still like he's going to the haunted mansion, he's doing all these things, he's not getting all the glory that Mario gets. So I got to give it to him. I think he's doing it for like the love of the game, you know. So
There you go. You may there's no they say there's no right answers, but we all know what the right answer is. Anyway, thank you for that. It's fun getting to know you a bit more, but let's get to know the game that you released this year, your labor of love. So, you
sure.
developed Farewell North, which released August 16th of this year, uh,
Mhm.
with publication from Moon Eye Studios. I met them in 2023 at PAX East. I think they had your
Cool.
game. I have the magnet. I got a magnet with chess and the flower, and also
Ah, cool.
Smooshy Come Home. Yeah. It is available on PC, Mac, Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch. The overall summary, and we'll dig deep into that, is restore color to the Scottish Isles of Farewell North, an atmospheric journey where you play as a border collie on an adventure with your human. Explore land and sea, uncover hidden paths, and free wildlife to bring color back to her world while revealing an emotional story about saying farewell. You've received several recognition for this game. So, first of all, just an 80 on Metacritic, I think is a big achievement because that in itself you always have to take with a grain of salt. But I was like, that's a pretty good score. We at Boss Rush we do a Metacritic draft, so I'm just like, dang, I should have went with Farewell North. That would have given me a Metacritic boost. But you also received many nominations, like the Patch Magazine. I'm a subscriber to Patch Magazine, by the way. So
Oh, cool.
Patch's Musical Moment Award, you were a nominee for the Indie Cups Critics Choice Awards, and lastly, you were part of, yeah, you were part of the Mix official selection. So that's
Mhm.
awesome. Congrats on all that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really surreal. I know this is like it's like an empty platitude, but I genuinely did not expect. I was like, if you know, if like 50% of people think it's like good on Steam, that'll be a miracle. So I'm
Mm.
very like blown away and humbled by the response. It's been really cool.
Yeah, this is, and just to level set, this is your first game, right?
That's
Or
right.
no?
Yeah,
Yep. Oh,
it's my first
yes.
like real game. Like I was dabbling in game development for about
Mhm.
10 years, but nothing that was ever released.
Gotcha. All right, awesome. Well, I get this is a good jumping point. So, in addition to the congrats, so it's been a couple months now. So, how has post launch been? Like, have you been doing much along with it? Or are you just kind of monitoring the feedback? Like, how has everything been post launch?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like there's obviously like a huge surge on launch day, and you've had you know months and months and years of like building up to this one day, and you have this like huge explosion of activity and flurry and everything. But for a narrative game, it kind of you know it slows down. It's not like an online multiplayer game where everyone's going. So it's been like pretty chill. Like there hasn't been any like major bugs. There's a few patches I had to do early on, but nothing like you know really game breaking or corrupted saves or anything like that. Thankfully, so no major fires. So it's been like nice and chill. It's been like a huge break. I was able to take a weekend off, get up to the Highlands, and just kind of like you know get away from my laptop and stuff, which was really nice. I am working on one thing. I can't really say what it is yet, but it's another platform but other than that, it's been really good. Yeah, the reception's been amazing. It's been quiet. Like I don't think you could really ask for a better response in that regard. So yeah, it's been good.
That's awesome. I know it's I don't know if you were like really surprised when I reached out to you. I was like, oh, maybe I should have just reached out to the Steam community, but let me just reach out to Kyle because I did something silly. It wasn't the game's fault. I must have just so for those that don't know or have not played Farewell North yet, there is, a dedicated bark button. I'm obsessed with that because, with Stray, I couldn't stop pressing the meow button. And, every time you bark, and the dog is Chess or Chesley, your human, Kaylee is how you pronounce it, right?
That's right.
Uh,
Yep.
she would always just say, like, "Oh, what do you see? Oh, there's nothing there." Like, it's just the interaction. I'm like, "Oh, I get my human to talk to me and pet me." And there was an achievement after a certain amount of time, but what happened was I believe I got the achievement and barked at the same time I
Mm.
completed a lighthouse, and somehow I got stuck in the lighthouse. So
Oh,
thankfully, you
geez.
just told me reloading the save, and it was no problem.
Yeah. So there's always like little stuff like that. Unfortunately, we had one playtester who was like that, was just spamming the bark button the entire time, and he found so many issues. Like a surprising number of issues came from that one thing. But yeah, I guess we got all of them, but we missed that one with the lighthouse. But hopefully that's
Oh,
a bit of an edge case.
yeah. Oh, it was great though. So now that we talked about post launch, let's rewind a bit about your origin story. Given that this is your first like kind of official game that you put out to the world, how did you get into game development?
So I'm a software engineer by trade,
Hmm.
and like pretty much from like day one when I was in college, the first line of code they taught us to write, I was like, I'm gonna figure out how to make games with this. And I was making like little, like terrible little terminal games like tic tac toe and stuff like that you'd
Hmm.
play on like the black and white terminal.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I was like hooked, and that was like kind of propelled me through college and everything. Was like at night just like tinkering on games and like messing around, and then I finally learned how to do like 2D graphics, and you could draw like an image on the screen and make it move around and stuff. So I was like hooked from the beginning. And then in like
Hmm.
2014, I've been working for a few years at this point, but 2014, I found out about Unity, like the game engine Unity,
Yep.
and that was like just kind of opened all the doors. Um, and yeah, I was just kind of like messing around for years and years and years, kind of moonlighting, doing like little projects and stuff. But I would like, work on it for a month and then like take 6 months off and not really do it. So it was kind of like just on and off dabbling in games.
Hmm.
And then with the pandemic, my wife and I had just moved from Canada. We got our flat, and then like a week later, lockdown happened. And so we
Oh
were basically
gosh.
like, yeah, we were basically like stranded in this country, didn't know anyone, didn't know, we couldn't leave our flat. Um, and so I was like, you know what? Like, if, I got all this like free time on my hands, I got all this inspiration from moving to Scotland and our plans to travel and everything. I'm going to like see if I can turn this into a game. And yeah, 4 years later, I was still working on it, but finally did it. Finally, actually released a game for the first time. So yeah, it's cool.
That's impressive and very admirable. The fact that, you went to college and kind of learned the basics, but you also kind of channeled that into a passion of yours. And for as much as COVID threw a monkey wrench into everybody's lives, I'm glad you were able to at least leverage the quote unquote extra time because we had no other
Yeah,
choice and be able to produce something beautiful. I mean, not close to as amazing as what you've done, but the COVID's kind of what prompted me to further pursue other aspects of my career because my primary career has nothing to do with games. I'm a pharmacist. It's like the
oh no way.
yeah, the opposite. But I've always been a writer. I've written a couple books. I love the arts. I want to do something in the arts, but because of my primary job, I couldn't fully dedicate it. But through COVID, I started listening to podcasts. I got to know the Boss Rush team and became creatively satisfied through here. So here we
That's
are
so cool.
today.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people that kind of like spawned a turn to like the creative and the arts and
Yeah,
stuff like that. And it's really cool to see like what kind of came out of that. For all the horrible things that also came out of the pandemic as well,
right.
it's nice that some good things came out of it.
Exactly. So might be a silly, naive question. So, do you have any Scottish lineage, or is it just the move to this country? Just being in that environment is the inspiration for kind of the backdrop of Farewell North.
Yeah, so my dad was born in Glasgow. My whole
Oh,
dad's side of the family was born in Glasgow and everything. They moved over to Canada in like the 70s, I think.
okay.
So I was like the first generation kind of born in
Mm,
Canada. And yeah, like as part of that, I think the rule is you can kind of pass citizenship on to to like the first generation born outside the country. So like
I see.
my dad could pass on citizenship to me, so I had dual citizenship, and it was just like, why not? We did the first 30 years in Canada. Let's just pack up and move and see what it's like over there. So yeah, it was kind of just not a spontaneous decision. It took kind of
Mhm,
a few years to plan out and everything, but it was
mhm.
like there's no like deeper meaning or anything. It was just kind of like, let's go check it out. We have access, and why not?
Exactly. Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So, over the few years that you've developed the game, what were some of the challenges you encountered and, overcoming them?
Mm. So many. um, yeah, I just released a YouTube video more on the kind of business side of making games,
Oh,
all about marketing and stuff like that, all the challenges there. But I think more interesting is probably the like creative and the actual like game design challenges.
mhm,
Um, I think like now that I know what I know, looking
mhm,
back, I think the design of Feral North was very, very ambitious, and I didn't really realize it at the time. In the sense of like playing as a four-legged character or quadruped character, turns out that's really, really complicated because game engines are all kind of focused on two-legged characters.
interesting.
Um, having like an NPC companion that follows you
Mhm,
along, but not having it feel like an escort mission.
mhm.
Everyone knows those escort missions that it's like it's all janky and they keep getting stuck and you keep having to
Yep.
reload and stuff. I decided to apparently make an entire game like that. So making that actually feel seamless and not have her get stuck and kind of all that stuff. Um, so many things. I think probably the most time of all the development was probably spent on Kaylee's character, kind of her animations, her movement, trying to get her behavior to be somewhat you know um, realistic, but obviously with constraints of being an indie developer, not like a big studio.
Mhm,
Um, yeah, so just a ton of time was spent on that. And another thing that I decided early on that again was like, now that I know what I know, I would probably be a little bit hesitant to do again was I wanted the whole game to play with no camera cuts. So from the very beginning of the game all the way to the end credits, the camera never jumps, never teleports, never cuts.
Oh, okay.
And that turns out is very, very complicated. That took a lot of development time just to make sure that the camera always wasn't going through walls, wasn't, all that kind of
Oh,
stuff. Um, yeah, so I mean, tons and tons of stuff. Like I think the most exciting thing about game development is like every day you're constantly learning. Like the field is so broad and there's so many disciplines and there's so much to know that you can never really know all of it. So every day you're like doing something new, doing something you've never done before, directing a voice actor or working with a composer or having a musician sing a song or whatever it is. And yeah, so you're just constantly trying to like learn as you go and not have the whole house of cards kind of come tumbling down.
mm.
Um, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that because just the few that you mentioned, I'm like, wow, I kind of would take that for granted because I'm just playing the game and everything's all smooth and no problem having Kaylee follow chess and everything. And I didn't realize like the challenges that go behind it. So definitely more appreciation there. And speaking of chess, I love the post that you made about the different iterations that you went through with this wonderful pet. How did you end up settling for a border collie? I know Chess started off as a Chihuahua, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned that I wanted to kind of like funnel this like Scottish move and that all that inspiration into a game, but there is like one little kink in that kind of poetic story, and that was this little weekend project. So as I was kind of like getting back into games, I was working on a game, it wasn't really working out. I kind of scrapped it, and I was like, I keep scrapping these ideas, and for some reason, I was like, I'm going to do this like weekend game jam.
Hmm.
And my idea for that was a Chihuahua trying to find the comfiest seat in the house. And we have two Chihuahuas actually. One named Barney though, and we call him the little comfy boy because he always has to be in like the most comfortable spot. Like he can't just be on the bed; he has to be like on the mountain of blankets on the bed. And if you like move him, he's like so disturbed. Um,
Oh,
so I thought it would make like a little game kind of inspired by him where you have to like find a blanket and get to the couch, and like it's like a little platformer. So every level
uh-huh.
is like you just go find your blanket, get to the couch. Um, and I called it Comfy Boy. And somehow that game turned into Feral North, and I don't really know exactly how that happened, but I did that little weekend project, and I was like, this is kind of fun. Like I like this idea of playing as a dog, and then I was like, I'm always kind of like I said, I'm always drawn to like more narrative driven experiences,
Um,
and the same thing kind of applies as a creator. Like I always want to kind of like have an emotional angle to it. Um, and so yeah, it kind of just like that weekend project turned into like a couple weeks project, and I was like, okay, now it's outside, and it's going to be set in Scotland, and like border
mm,
collies are from the kind of border region of
mm,
Scotland, and we see them everywhere here, and so yeah, it just kind of like snowballed. So it was kind of Farewell North wasn't like perfectly planned out from day one. It was very much
Mhm.
like a process of kind of trial and error and kind of like
It
just kind of like
evolved.
going with these ideas. Yeah, and it really evolved
Yeah.
throughout development. And there's quite a few stages. And as you saw in that post, even once it was a border collie, there was like 4 or 5 different versions of
Mhm.
that border collie before we finally got to like the final model that's the Chesley that people play as.
Mhm.
Um, but that little Chihuahua game actually you can find and you can play inside of Feral North. So if you
Oh,
there's like
yeah,
a
that's it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So that was like my little weekend game jam project, and then long story short, 4 years later, it ended up being like embedded in Feral North, and Feral North kind of had spawned from that. So it was kind of just all came full circle.
Oh my gosh, that's sorry. Just like the light bulb went off in my head because I'm like, oh look, she's playing on. I think it looked like a little Switch device. I forgot. Like I'm sure
Yeah,
you were just making. And I was like, oh, let me. I'm not. I'll admit, I got a couple levels in, and then I realized I'm not good at platformers. But I love
yeah,
the connection. That's awesome. That's like almost a little inside. And it's not what's it like a not inside joke because it's not a joke, but like a I don't know, a little fourth wall secret Easter egg
yeah. Kind of
kind
Easter
of
egg.
thing.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
awesome. Wow. All right. Sorry. All right. Moving on to the human NPC, Kaylee.
Mhm.
So again, just background for everyone. I don't, you know, I don't know if this story is necessarily spoilable, but I'm not going to spoil it, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But you travel from island to island on a little kayak, and the way I see it is there are little kind of like lights to determine where you could go, but there's still options of the order of which you can tackle them, correct? At least that's how
Yeah,
it felt to me. And there are collectibles and little things you can do, but each island contains either a memory or kind of an emotional trial that you need to go through. So Kaylee represents many of us in the younger generation that feels like they've outgrown their parents' traditions, especially if you're a child of someone that's very heavily involved in a type of tradition. Like I say that because I'm a first gen Asian American. There are certain times in my life where I felt like I outgrew it, but now as I'm older, I return to said traditions. So as Kaylee grew older, she loses her mother. She returns to the Scottish Isles to recall songs, memories, and reconcile her identity. So tell us a bit more of how you tied Scottish culture, Gaelic. I really appreciated the use of Gaelic in the game and all these complex human emotions because that's not easy. Now I'm not saying an
mhm.
emotionless bang bang shooty shooty game is easy either, but there's an art to weaving all this together.
Yeah. So the Scottish connection, I always wanted to do make sure that I was doing that really respectfully because as a kind of an immigrant to this country, being from Canada, I'm technically Scottish, but I don't necessarily like feel like I identify as Scottish or like I would be
Hmm.
comfortable telling
Yeah.
in a crowd of people in a pub like, oh, I'm Scottish too. Like I would feel some sort of like um, imposter syndrome about that, I guess.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
wanted to make sure if I'm using Scottish culture and everything and didn't grow up here, that I'm making sure that I'm doing that very respectfully. So
Hmm.
there's a few things that we did. So the song, as you mentioned, that's a song from like 1798, I believe, by Robert Burns, called "My Heart's in the Highlands," and that poem is where the name Farewell North comes from. Because there's a line in that poem or that song, "Farewell to the Highlands, farewell to the North," and "Farewell to the North" eventually became "Farewell North." And the whole game, this isn't really a spoiler, it's in the title, Farewell North, is kind of saying goodbye to the place that she grew up. So you're going back home and for reasons that are kind of
Hmm.
discovered in the game, you're saying farewell to this place and kind of the area that you grew up. And Kaylee as a character has kind of, similar to my own experience, kind of moved away from where she grew up. She moved down to the city,
Hmm.
and she kind of along the way kind of let go of some of those connections that she had to the island. But as she comes back, she kind of like remembers that they're all there, and they're all kind of like part of making her who she is. So we really wanted to explore all of that and kind of using Scotland as this kind of like canvas to tell this story. We incorporated all kinds of things like Gaelic, so you can play the game with. We did a full Gaelic translation of the game as well as like optional subtitles, so you can play in
Hmm.
English or French or German, whatever language, and still have Gaelic subtitles to kind of get a bit of that experience. There's little side stories that you'll discover for why Gaelic is so important. where her name comes from and her true name. Like in Gaelic, her name is different than it is in English. Um, and like why her mom gave her that name and stuff like that.
Mm.
And we kind of learn a little bit about what she did on the islands and kind of working in tourism, which is a big thing in Scotland. Um, and how Chesley the dog, how he adapted to the move because he grew up in the islands as well. And there's a whole kind of sequence where we see when he moves to the city with Kaylee how he kind of copes with that or doesn't cope with that. So yeah, trying to make sure that like Scotland is always at the fore of the game, but it's never played for laughs. Like a lot of times, Scotland is used for comedic effect, like for example, like Shrek or whatever, like
Mhm.
the Scottish accent,
Yep.
which is fine. There's nothing really wrong with
Yeah.
that. But we wanted to do it in a way that was just like kind of paying homage to Scotland in modern day. So it's not like Highlanders and Braveheart and stuff, and it's not playing it for jokes. It's just kind of like a look at Scotland as it is now, and the beauty of the country and the beauty of the landscape, the language, and all of that. So yeah, it was really really important to me that we kind of paid respect to all that and did it very respectfully. And all of our voice actors are from Scotland. The voice actor for Kaylee, she's from Skye, and she's credited as a writer in the game because she brought so much authenticity that like I couldn't. Um, Even in like the writing and the dialogue, a lot of times I would let like little Canadianisms slip in there that she would catch and she would like kind of properly
Ooh,
adapt
okay.
to someone who actually grew up in Scotland. Um, and yes, it was such a collaborative experience. We worked with Siobhan Miller to do the vocals for the song, and she's a kind of legendary Scottish folk singer. So that was really really cool. And yeah, so it was just just always kind of keeping Scotland for front of mind throughout the development and seeing how we can kind of incorporate more and more of that, and have the kind of landscape be kind of a character in the
Mhm.
game as well.
Nice. It's really great insight, especially, having the voice actor be able to kind of provide input on the writing, because we all
Mhm.
have a different manner of speaking around the world. So it makes sense because it definitely felt authentic to me. It didn't feel like anything was misplaced or pandering or anything. Like it just felt like, wow, like I really want to go pack my bags and go now. So
Perfect.
so sorry. And it's funny that you mentioned the section where you kind of in a sense revisit how Chess felt when he moved to the city with his human. And I gotta say it was one of my favorite puzzles just because there's a big story element to it, especially for a character that doesn't speak. It's a dog, only whines, barks. So
Mhm.
it for me it conveyed a very powerful emotion. I could feel the fear, a lot of fear, like people looking for Chess, but Chess is afraid of these other humans. Um, sorry, I have a child in the background.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
the game is filled with fun puzzles. It's not just a singular type of puzzle. I know one of the main aspects is restoring color to the islands, with a little power or ability that chess has. But there are other types like herding, and so on and so forth. And also, one second, a perspective, like using the perspective of the environment to help bridge gaps. What are
Mhm.
some of your favorite puzzles to make in a game?
Hmm, that's a good question. So obviously the whole game centers around that kind of color mechanic. So
Mhm.
that was like one of the first things right after the Chihuahua. The second thing was the color mechanic. Um, and so that all throughout development kind of evolved, and that was always fun to work on. And just technically, that was a really interesting thing to work on. But in terms of like game design, I think uh, two kind of stand out. So one is actually that sequence where we're kind of seeing the world through Chesley's eyes, and we're seeing how he's um, not really adjusting to city life, and keeping in mind that he's a working dog from the islands. He's not used to seeing crowds of people. He's probably never seen a crowd of people. Um, and suddenly he's in the city, and it's Hogmanay, and there's fireworks going off, and it's all way too much for him. That was a lot of fun to work on because I love when you can kind of weave a narrative into mechanics. So there's kind of like a light stealth gameplay in that. Um, which is stealth is always kind of fun to work on. I don't know what it is, but like just programming stealth sequences and stuff is it's a very satisfying thing. I don't know why, but um, I like when you can kind of weave the narrative into the mechanics, and you have like a strong reason for these things existing, and you can also have some levity in there as well, because we as the human playing the game, we hear the characters walking around, they're looking for Chesley and they're trying to help him, and we know and we recognize as the player that they're trying to help, but Chesley's obviously doesn't understand them and he's scared of them, and it's just this kind of like um I can't think of the word, but it's kind of I keep on saying irony, but that's not the right word.
Mm.
Essentially we see the world one way, the character sees the world another way, and
Another
we have
way,
to
yeah.
kind of like empathize with the way that he's
Yep.
seeing it in order to play. So I thought that was interesting, and I loved that we were able to kind of get some emotion out of Chesley, as you said, because he can't speak, but we were able to get like a lot of insight into his kind of psyche and his way of seeing the world through that.
Mhm.
So I really love that. Um, and the other one is the sheep herding. That was one that was kind of tricky to get right. Again, it's like one of those things, kind of like escort missions, where we've all played games that have like kind of a tacked on herding thing where you have
Mhm.
to get a bunch of sheep or something somewhere, and it's just like they're not cooperating. It's really frustrating. That one was a lot of fun to work on, and the getting kind of into the weeds here, the solution was to actually have them behave kind of like birds. So this algorithm called Boyd's that simulates how flocks of birds move. And using that for the sheep was actually kind of what made them finally feel fluid, and not getting stuck everywhere, and kind of feel like they're moving as a unit, and kind of working with you a little bit. So once that clicked, that was really really satisfying, and I personally love those sequences in the game. I think they're my favorite part. I love the music that John Konsolakis, the composer, the music that he brought in there was just so like energetic and playful, which is a really nice contrast to the more kind of moody tones of the rest of the game.
Mhm.
And yeah, every time one of the kind of sheep herding, or we have several other animals that you heard throughout the game, any of those herding sequences kicks in, I just love like the feel of that. So I was really happy with how that came together. Um, yeah, so those are the two that kind of like stand out right away.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned music, so why don't we move on to there? Because that's what I want to focus on now is music and then also art style. So I feel silly asking it this way, but this is kind of like a bridge question of telling us more about the importance of music in Farewell North, because I feel much akin to where I say, wow, sound design for Silent Hill 2 sets up like 50% of the game because of the mood that it sets. Obviously,
Mhm.
completely different genre, but the music in Farewell North is one of my most favorite aspects of the game. I mean, next to the story, which was very powerful and made me cry, by the way. Um,
Sorry.
but the music is very moving. I just feel like, wow, this is like top notch, high quality stuff. Like I would love a soundtrack to this. So tell me about the process and and also where you found the lyrics to the songs that Kaylee slowly recalls.
Yeah. So I really owe credit to John Konsolakis for the whole score. He's just an absolutely brilliant composer, and I was really really fortunate to work with him. He was the first person to join the project, and um, I've mentioned this before. I can't remember where, but he was kind of. This is one of those naive things. I brought him on kind of much earlier than you would typically bring a composer on, and I think that worked brilliantly. So it was kind of a very fortuitous mistake. So he came on about 3 years ago, before we even had a demo or a proof of concept or anything like really tangible, other than like some very basic environments you walk around that I don't think any of those are even in the game anymore. Um, and he just like fully invested himself in the project. He didn't want to just like slap music on at the
Hmm.
end, which is
Yeah.
kind of a common practice. He wanted to be fully involved in helping to craft the story. And again, he's credited as an additional writer in the game because he really did get right into the weeds of like helping to kind of shape the narrative, and kind of pushing the story in certain directions that I was maybe a little scared to go into. Um, and yeah, so he just like fully embedded in the project, and I think that really allowed us to have a really rich musical integration. So the if you were to peel behind the curtains, music makes up a quite a substantial portion of like the code base of the game, and I don't think that's necessarily normal. But we embedded it like into everything. So everything from the canoe to every bird to butterflies, they all have their own motifs and their own kind of implementation of music,
Mhm.
and they're very adaptive. So the music of the canoe is bringing in new instruments. The faster you go, more and more layers of instruments are coming on to give it energy, and we kind of did that for every mechanic and every puzzle and every sequence in the game. So I don't even know how many minutes or hour plus of music that there is in the game, but there's a lot of music,
Hmm.
and pretty much every sequence has its own score and its own motifs, and they're all calling back on one another. So if you really pay attention, you can find in the final sequences you can find motifs to or references to things that happened hours ago in the story. Um, and yeah, so John just like absolutely nailed it. Really, really knocked it out of the park. And the good news is there is a soundtrack. If you're inclined to check it out, you can find it on Spotify, all the major streaming services, and it's also on Steam. And that all goes straight
Oh,
to John. So I would definitely recommend, encourage anyone to check that out. It's really
oh,
beautiful.
perfect. So that's where I'll be headed to, and then everyone else check it out because I highly recommend the music in that game.
Yeah.
All right. So
And
how
then
about art? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to answer your question about the lyrics to the song. So
Yeah.
the name, as I said, the name Feral North comes from this 1798 song by Robert Burns, who's a very very kind of legendary Scottish poet. Um, and as I was trying to figure out the name of the song, I was reading some poetry and stuff, and I found this song by Robert Burns, "My Heart's in the Highlands." And so, like all throughout, this was years ago, but all throughout development, it was kind of like trying to find a way to kind of pay homage to that song. And we didn't want to just, you know, do a recording of the song and then like have it randomly play throughout the game. We wanted the
Mhm.
characters to actually know and like have a intimate connection to the song. So the way we did that, it's kind of minor spoiler, but it's introduced pretty early on. Is that this is a song that Kaylee's mom used to sing to her. So through the game, you'll go kind of find these uh, collectibles, and Kaylee will remember another kind of verse of the song.
Mhm.
And so for that, we got Siobhan Miller, who's, like I said earlier, just like an absolutely legendary folk singer here in Scotland. Um, and it was such a long shot, but we just reached out to her and was like, "Hey, is there any chance you'd be willing to sing this song? And we'd love to work with you." And like she called me a few hours later, and she's like, "I've got like one day, we can get this, we can make this work." And yeah, she was just incredible. So we got her into a studio and recorded it, and it was like the most probably my favorite day of development on the entire project because it was just I was like completely just having my own private concert. It was all John and Siobhan just working their magic, and it was so much fun. It was a really really special day.
Wow.
It was really cool.
Nice. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that was probably one of my favorite, collectibles of the game, because sometimes in other games, collectibles are just for collectibles' sake, or you just get a trophy, which some people are very trophy motivated. Um, but I was more motivated because of the ties to the story and the sentimental value, and it's not just handed to me all at once. I just don't feel like, I mean, that's nice, but it's more rewarding for me to actively seek out, like, all right, I need to explore more because I really want to find the next set of lyrics. And you hear, hear the commentary, hear the beautiful voice, and if you choose to have the subtitles, which I did, like, wonderful tie-in to the narrative, and it's beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed that. It means a lot.
Yeah. All right, so cool. Just a tiny switch over to art style. Any comments on the art style that you chose? I do feel like it was very fitting. The whole concept of maybe a colorless island, and then all of a sudden it becomes very vibrant. I believe is integral to the theming and everything. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so obviously the kind of central hook of the game, the central mechanic of the game is this whole idea of restoring color to the world. And like I said, I always want to kind of like have an emotional or narrative
Mhm.
um, kind of through line through any mechanic or anything that's introduced like that. So the whole color thing is a kind of metaphor for the human character's emotional state. So as her dog, you're kind of bringing color back to her world by helping her work through these memories or finding things that bring like little sparks of joy throughout the game. So you might bring her a flower or some play with some birds or whatever it is, and just kind of bring like momentary sparks of color back to the world. Excuse me.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, so that was like the kind of central visual hook of the game. And then for the art style, that went through some iterations as well. But I think what we kind of landed on was having a more stylized and kind of surreal, highly saturated, very vibrant
Yep.
color palette for the natural elements, so like vegetation and grass and trees and animals and all of that. Because again, that's kind of like this like magic of kind of going back to this like um, uh, place that she absolutely loves, and having these things be kind of like um, so vibrant, kind of representing that love of those elements. And then the man-made elements like buildings and docks and stuff are a little bit grittier. They have a bit more texture to them, just kind of a little bit slightly more in like a realism
Okay.
kind of direction. And so that was kind of how I thought about the art style there.
Hmm. I appreciate you providing your thought process here because, again, maybe from the consumer side, maybe many of us might not, see through to all of that. And it's a good reminder that when you're a creator, whether it's a video game or an author or a movie director, everything, for the most part, has to be intentional, unless you're
Mhm.
intentionally not being intentional. So that's great. My last question this is kind of for me, one of my biggest weaknesses as a video game consumer is any sort of physical or collector's edition. I know my wallet's hurting for all my collections. If you ever had an opportunity to have a physical collector's edition and you could handpick whatever came in the edition with no cap on cost, what would be your biggest fantasy about a Farewell North Deluxe Collector's Edition?
Oh, that's a fun one. That's a lot of fun to think about. Um, yeah, wow. I think I would have to put some like dog apparel in there. So like maybe a collar or a bandana or something
Yes.
with some like it's very subtle. I don't think anyone can really see it, but underneath Chesley's fur, he's got a little tartan collar on.
Hmm.
So maybe a little replica of that would be really cool. Or even like a tartan blanket because that tartan pattern on his collar also is on Kaylee's scarf, and it's you
Mm.
find it in their house as well. So I think yeah, possibly having like a little tartan blanket or something so you can like cozy up as you play the game would be cool. Um, yeah, what else? I'm trying to think. I think it'd be really cool if going with that direction of like having like a blanket and like kind of cozying up for the game, maybe like a little mug or something.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a fun one though. There'll be a lot of fun to plan out for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll probably throw in some like really obvious stuff because I'm only I'm thinking about like stuff I'd like. I would, would love. I know you said their soundtrack is available, but
Hmm.
either like a CD or I don't know. I see advertisements for cassettes now. There's like cassettes, vinyl, CDs,
No
everything's all
way.
retro. I don't know, something like that,
I,
or an art book, something of
oh,
the
for
like.
sure. Yeah,
So,
these are more logical and practical.
oh
Yeah,
no,
that probably makes more sense.
no,
I did not
I would
realize.
go ahead.
I
I'm
was just gonna
sorry.
say I did not realize that cassettes were making a comeback now. That's
Yeah, I don't know if I can reach it
strange.
without yanking my laptop. I was at PAX West and I got one like for Celeste. I don't know if you could see it. I don't want
Oh,
the glare.
cool.
And then Coffee Talk. I know. I'm like, I'm sure
Hmm.
it's still not as big as vinyl. Like vinyl's still huge, but I was like, sure, I'll go buy cassettes and then buy a cassette that's made now that's overpriced because now retro's in instead of
Yeah,
I'm sure the cassette I owned 30 years ago would still have worked, but it's probably
yeah.
in a dump somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, no, I think a blanket or a bandana even would be fantastic. I like collectibles that are also in theming
Mhm.
with the game. This wasn't a in-purchase collectible, but and I would have bought the physical anyway, but I bought a physical for Gory Cuddly Carnage. I'm obsessed with that game and I love Angry Demon Studios. And they did like a golden ticket opportunity, like 10 physicals will have this like
Mm,
golden ticket and you can get like a skateboard, not the with the wheels, but like the board itself and it's all like gory design because Gory has a
cool.
hoverboard. I'm not a skateboarder, but I wanted it so badly. So I get it.
Maybe I could like stuff a canoe into the box if it's a really big box and cost is no concern.
Yeah,
Just send out some canoes.
exactly. Or an inflatable one. Then you can just kind of suck all
Oh
the
yeah.
air out.
See,
Oh,
you're much more practical on these ideas. I'm thinking crazy things, sending entire canoes out.
not practical, maybe just boring. You're more creative. You got
Mm.
the creative juices going. So thank you for sharing that with me. So, thank you for answering all my questions. And I'm not just saying because, I'm on the call, this interview with you, but I truly, genuinely enjoyed your game. I wish I got to it sooner, like immediately when it released, but a couple other reviews I had to get done. But I was very invested in it. I love games that can teach me more about a culture, whether it's my own or not related at all. Felt very authentic. And even though, again, it took place in the Scottish Isles, I still had a very close connection to the character, because I feel like a lot of us, we can all relate emotion in one way or the other. The gameplay was smooth. I never encountered a problem except for the one that I created and brought upon myself. Um, and for those listening, I did write a review on Farewell North on the Boss Rush website, as well as on Steam, and I can't recommend it enough, especially since you mentioned cozy, Kyle. Like this time of year, if you're looking for a cozy game, this is an example of a wonderfully cozy game. So I recommend this to anyone that likes story-driven games, cozy games, or even if someone that's not necessarily narrative-driven, just a solid story. A nice, trip away from reality for a few hours. It is highly recommended on my list. So
Thank you so much. That's really, really kind of you to say. I really appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah, no problem. Before I get into my housekeeping and wrap this up, is there anything else that you want to do a shout out as far as like either where people can follow you or the game? Also, if you want, I know you mentioned you put out something on, I don't know if it was YouTube, about game development. Maybe there's people out there that are
Hmm.
listening that would like to learn. Like, feel free to plug anything you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on most platforms at Kyle Banks. And yeah, I do like a devlog series on YouTube, kind of showing. I mean, there's like 4 years worth of videos just like developing Farewell North, and then a couple recently I've been kind of like recapping and kind of lessons learned and kind of things mistakes I made along the way and stuff like that. So if you're kind of an aspiring game developer, you're interested in like what goes on behind the scenes, I would definitely recommend checking that out. You can find it at youtube.com/, I think it's at Kyle Banks. I think that's how they do it. But anyways, if you search Kyle Banks, it'll come up. There's a rapper Kyle Banks, and then there's me. The rapper always comes first. But
Okay.
anyways,
Awesome.
yeah,
All right, great. Thank you. I'll be checking that out myself, and the
cool.
soundtrack that I'll be listening to. I got to go to a another Thanksgiving feast today, so that'll be in the car.
Nice.
All right, so hang tight. Try not to fall asleep. If you want to support the Boss Rush podcast and the Boss Rush Network, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/, Boss Rush Network on the tier that's right for you, earning perks such as early ad-free access to this and other podcasts, exclusive access to spotlight interview access threads, voting rights on Video Game Book Club, and more. That's patreon.com/Boss Rush Network. But as always, your listenership and viewership is always enough for us. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and leave us a thumbs up or even a comment. If you're listening to this on a podcast service like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please consider leaving us a review. We did not talk about Elden Ring, so there's no reason why you can't leave us a bad review. It's a joke. One time we talked on the Boss Rush podcast about Elden Ring, and it wasn't anything bad. We weren't criticizing the game at all. We were just saying, I haven't played it. It's a bit daunting for me. I don't know if I should play. It was just like conversation. Someone left us like a 1-star review because we
No.
didn't praise the game. It's all right. It's all
Ah,
good.
jeez.
Last but not least, check out our merch on TeePublic with over 50 designs to represent our favorite shows. And as always, check out all our content, reviews, articles, such as a review on Farewell North on bossrush.net. I feel like I'm in those pharmaceutical commercials.
You're
Thank you
nailing
so
this though.
much. Thank you for watching and or listening to the Boss Rush Spotlight podcast. I need a cup of coffee. The interview series for the Boss Rush Network. You can catch new episodes on podcast services or YouTube. Just subscribe to the channel. I gotta tell Corey to rewrite this. This is so much of repeating the same thing. Everybody, you know what to do. Thank you for joining us on the Boss Rush Spotlight. Take care.
If you want to see how you can become a Patreon producer, head on over to patreon.com/BossRushNetwork. The Patreon producers for this month are Adriel Munger, Austin Campbell, Celeste Roberts, Christian S., Sana Dierig, Francisco Santillan, Matthew Keel, and Todd Oxtra. Thanks for your continued support of the Boss Rush Network.